Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are waiting for our speaker and we'll be beginning in 2 to 5 minutes.
Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Carson, for joining us today. And happy Diwali to everybody, firstly. And today we have Carson with us. He's a senior product manager at Shipwell. And previously, he worked as a principal product manager at Sabre Corporation. And he is UTD alumnus and he has like 6+ years of experience as a product manager. So he will be sharing with us his journey and his transition as a UTD grad to a successful product manager. And join me in welcoming Carson today. And over to you, Carson.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm very excited. Sorry I'm a bit late. I don't use Teams very much. So it proved tricky. All right, now let's see if I can share my screen. Uh-oh, I've had this problem before. Okay. Let's see. Hold on just a second.
I think he's facing some technical difficulties with Teams.
Yeah, we just have to wait for him a little bit. He was unable to log in as well.
Guys, meanwhile, if anybody has like any questions for Carson, like feel free to put them in the chat. He'll be answering at the end of the event. Amran, can you reach out to him and see if he's okay with the link, or should we add him to the call?
Yeah, I'm just doing that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm back. You guys have me?
Yes.
We've had that problem like every week on our Shipwell sprint reviews, which is we use Max, and on Max you can't screen share. You have to specifically allow permission for screen sharing, and then you have to quit the app and restart it. So we'd have these developers come in for sprint demos and like, okay, I'm gonna share my screen now. And they never shared their screen before, so then they're like, oh crap, no, I have to restart Slack, start over. Okay, let's see, screen.
So I think there's an icon right next to the mute button. Yep, you got it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think we're ready now. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yep.
Yeah, Carson, we can see that.
Okay, cool. All right. So I am Carson Marston. I am a product manager at Shipwell. I went through the UTD MBA class in 2012. There's a nice picture of me with less hair. Before I came into UTD, I had worked in healthcare. I studied psychology, and then I worked in clinical healthcare environments for a while, and decided to go back and get my MBA and go into healthcare administration was my idea. And instead, I was recruited by a healthcare technology firm. So I spent a couple of years doing electronic health record implementations and optimizations and all kinds of consulting projects. And it was a great experience, but I wasn't very happy doing that type of work. It was a lot of project management. It was it was a lot of travel, and then this was about 2014 or so, and 2015 I started hearing about product management from another peer that I went to UTD with, and he was at Sabre actually, and was telling me about what he was doing as a product manager, and it sounded like exactly what I wanted to do. Something that was more creative, something that was more business focused, and sounded great. So I kind of repositioned myself. I read the Cracking the PM Interview book, which I think is a giveaway today, which is a great resource. But I read all the books, read all the articles, and tried to educate myself on product. And got a job at Sabre in the airline space, managing one of their products. Went over to Active Network, which is in the fitness and event registration space, and now I'm at Shipwell, which is a startup here in Austin that helps companies manage freight. So that's a bit about me. So next, I'm going to attempt to use a lovely engagement tool here. So if you can go to ahaslides.com/UTD product, you should be able to get into this here and just vote and let me know what your experience is with product management. Do you have no idea what product management is and you're here to learn about it? All the way to, maybe you've worked as a PM before.
Carson, it will be great if you can share the link with us on the chat.
That would be great. I don't see the chat, but it's right here. It's ahaslides.com/UTD product. So this is good, all over the map. So we have some with no experience, which is great, which is to be expected. People right in the middle, and some that have worked as PM before. That's great. All right, now we'll go to the next question, which is, oh boy. Stand by. Okay. What are you hoping to learn today? What are you hoping to get out of today's session? Now that we are 15 minutes in due to technical difficulties. I'm expecting someone to say, you know, like, what is product management? And if product management is the right career for me, because that's what I would be wondering if I was in your shoes. Prototypes and wireframing. How to break into PM with that experience. Challenges. Okay, cool. Yeah, so we're going to talk about prototyping for sure. Not a whole lot about wireframing, a bit about wireframing. It was interesting to put this presentation. There's way too much to talk about, so I hope I put together a good presentation for you. PM skills, yeah, we'll talk about that. Okay, I think that's it. All right, so let me try this again. So yeah, so that's kind of my experience getting into product, and oh man, Teams slows down my computer so much. So okay, so some of you are new to product management, so I wanted to talk a little bit about my view on kind of what product management is, and I really like this tweet. Just kind of simplifies it. It's defining, this is a great Twitter follow, by the way, defining the product and coordinate actions across the org to enable its success. Defining success based on, there's a lot of ways to define success, but it could be user adoption, business impact, some skills, common sense, immense empathy, influential communication, low ego, deep care, high agency. So kind of at a tweet level, what is product management? And there's a lot of ways to you can probably have seen a lot of these different type of charts that always seem to have product management like right in the middle and everything else on the outside, which is kind of contrast with the low ego part of product management when you want to define yourself as being the middle of everything. But I like these. There's, we'll talk about it in the next slide a bit, but there's product management tends to be different at different companies. But I think I really like this illustration of there's kind of, in some ways, two sides. There's kind of the strategic side, which is finding out how to build the right product, looking at users, looking at the market, looking at opportunities, putting together business cases, doing research, figuring out what people want, and then on the execution side, working with engineering, working with testing, working with design, and you're kind of in the middle of that, and you're kind of translating what should we be building to let's actually go and execute it. And depending on the company, you might have more resources over here. You might have a product owner. You might have dev managers that are really doing the more execution part, a design team, or you might have more firm grasp of your product market fit. You might have more resources over here that are helping you with this, or you might be doing a lot of it yourself. I mean, I've been in PM roles where there were no designers. I was the designer. And like now at Shipwell, we have a whole design team, so I don't really do any design. So it just kind of depends. And then I like this one because part of being a product manager is taking a lot of ownership over the entirety of the product of the business, and so you end up spending a lot of time with other stakeholders and helping out with sales, talking to marketing, working on strategy, working with customer escalations, working with customer service. So you're kind of all over the place. It's definitely not a single silo type position. And then, like I said, it's really different in different organizations. So when I first was looking at product management and was reading things and looking at those books with the traditional Silicon Valley companies, it was very technical. They were taking engineers that have been engineers at like Google or something for 5 or 10 years, giving them like a year of business training, and then making them PMs. And I think that exists still somewhat. Sometimes those are now a little bit more segmented, and you'll see the role being called like a technical PM, or there'll be a technical PM career track. Like I think Amazon has technical and non-technical PMs. So a technical PM might manage, APIs as a service and things like that, whereas the business PM will do obviously some, more customer-facing things. And then at different companies, the PM role is very different. So like at B2C companies, like Facebook and Netflix, social media companies, you're focused on engagement. Everything you do is around how do we get more users interacting with the platform. That's what you're measuring your success on. On e-commerce sites, it's all about conversion. How do we optimize the checkout flow? How do we optimize buttons and the website design so that people buy more things? That's a product manager role. At large kind of B2B companies where you have big contracts, like I did at Sabre, it's a lot more defined. You're working on new sales. You're working with current customers. You're doing a lot of work that's contractually defined. So, big giant customer comes to Oracle and says, we need this feature exactly like this, and then you're tasked with going to build that, which is a lot different than working at Facebook and trying to get more users to use Marketplace or something like that. So, and then there's kind of the B2B SaaS product-led companies, which is sort of what Shipwell is trying to be, where you're not using contracts to keep customers. You're focused on adoption. You're really trying to push the value. This is kind of the area that I'm trying to focus on. And then obviously there's a big difference between a startup and large organizations. Large organizations have, in theory, much more sophisticated product processes. They have, much more sophisticated customer service and sales and marketing, and hopefully know a lot more about the market. Startups can be kind of, especially for a product person, you're doing a lot more, taking on a lot more ownership across the company. So I'm sure this is probably a question, so I just kind of wanted to write down really quick what my typical day looks like, at least right now, some things that I'm working on. So I've been doing a competitive research project. So, we're a startup. There's not a ton of internal knowledge about what our competitors are up to. So I've been working on figuring out what our competitors are up to, and more importantly, what customers and buyers in the market are looking for. And we're going to use this to help guide our strategy for next year. I have a big feature that I'm planning for Q1, and I'm working on putting together the requirements for that. Part of that does include some wireframes, but looking at what do we need to build, how we're going to build it. Backlog grooming, so I sit in all of our Agile meetings, sprint planning and backlog grooming. I just finished I was just on a 2.5 hour call with a prospective customer, helping them understand the platform. I don't do a whole lot of current customer escalations in this role, but I've definitely done a lot of that in the past, because when something doesn't work, you're the one that kind of designed it and built it, and knows how it works. So a lot of that ends up coming to you. Strategy for next year and working with consultants. So just kind of an idea. It's the great thing about product management is it's kind of all over the place, and you do a lot of different things. So is product management right for you? Right for me? This is kind of a fun list to put together, but I think in terms of, as you assess yourself and look at product management, product managers, I think the number one skill is probably communication, because a lot of the role is it's been called like the QB, the quarterback that kind of coordinates all parts of the product. You're translating user requirements into technical documentation, but there's a lot of persuasive. You're not typically, the dev team doesn't report to you, the design team doesn't report to you, no one reports to you. So how do you get these teams to do what you want them to do and put their time in what you want them to do? So persuasive, definitely listening to customers, sitting down with users and watching them work and observing them and seeing, okay, how are they using this tool, and how could we improve it, and listening to them tell you what problems they're having with it. So definitely communication skills. You should enjoy ambiguity, where which I get frustrated a lot with, but you're solving problems that don't have an answer, and you're solving problems that the problem is probably not even well defined, right? So there's a lot of sitting around and doing thinking sessions and things like that. But you should love solving problems, have a broad knowledge, like I showed earlier, with all the different kind of stakeholders you're working with. So you need to have a broad knowledge of kind of how businesses work and how technology works. It's definitely a role that requires initiative, because a lot of things you're just going to come up with on your own and run with them. And you should like having a complicated calendar, which is basically just you're meeting with customers 1 second, you're meeting with internal people 1 second, you're brainstorming 1 second. And if you it's not for you if you like doing the same thing every day, if you don't like talking to people, if you think your ideas are always the best, if you like to stay in your silo. So I know, like when I was at UTD and the finance guys came in and they were like, yeah, I just sit in Excel all day and don't talk to anyone. And I was like, that's not for me. So if you like to just sit in Excel all day and hide, then product's probably not right for you. But maybe I mean, product's growing, so analytics, data science, things like that, but maybe not for you. Okay, so that's kind of a quick intro, and please write down I think I have a Q&A thing at the end, so you can definitely feel free to ask questions. I don't think there's a great way to interrupt me, unfortunately, but definitely write down any questions you have. So I kind of went back and forth on how to go through this, but figured we just kind of start at a high level. So there's a lot of different ways features and products are built and designed and tested and things like that. So I'll kind of walk through a few, but basically this is the general idea, right? There's an opportunity, there's an idea. You build a business case, you create a PRD, and you say, okay, we want to build a feature. And then you maybe create a prototype. You do some kind of test to iterate on your design for the solution you've identified. You go build it, and then you get feedback on it, or you sell it, right? That's kind of the general idea. So the analogy I like to use for product is is that it's like if you worked for a car manufacturer, right? And your job was to figure out what features we're going to put into next year's car model. So like if you're working on the minivan and you only have a finite number of resources and developers, and you're deciding, are you going to invest in a bigger engine? Do you need more comfortable seats? Do you need a larger TV screen in the back seat? What features are you going to put in and invest in for next year that'll sell more? So you're doing research in the market. You're seeing how much things are going to cost. You're finding suppliers, all that type of thing, right? So, like your idea might be, let's put a vacuum cleaner in the minivan, right? Families need vacuum cleaners. So you test it, you build a prototype, talk to focus groups, you build it, they roll off the line with vacuum cleaner installed, and you profit. And they actually did this, right? They put a vacuum cleaner in a minivan. But that's kind of the analogy I use for product management. But of course, it's not that easy because people don't always have very good ideas, right? Especially internal people. So a lot of companies, ideas come from internal, right? So this kind of shows, yeah, we talked to a bunch of users, and all their dumb suggestions ruin the product. Probably should have talked to people who work outside this building, right? So if you did every feature request, if you did every idea, your product would probably be trash, right? And we've seen a lot of products do this where they're not focused, they don't have a great strategy, and they fail. But understanding the market is really hard, right? So the iPhone is a great example where, I don't know if you remember when the iPhone was released. This is from David Platt is like a tech industry guy that said that it was going to fail because the keyboard, the touch keyboard, was such a bad idea that people would prefer the tactile buttons of the other phones, and no one would like the iPhone keyboard, right? So how do you take an idea and test it and develop it and make sure it's the right idea? So where do ideas come from? Well, there's the light bulb genius idea, which some people, I guess some products have come up that are just kind of genius ideas. There's top down, which a lot of companies still use, which is basically whatever the highest person in the room says. If the executive says we need to put a vacuum cleaner in the van, then we're going to put a vacuum cleaner in the van. Internal, which is can be, I mean, all these can be good or bad, but internal can be good or bad. It can be, somebody from support or marketing or product or whoever that has an idea for a new feature. Customer requests is typically a good place to start for features, which is, hey, I'm using the product. It'd be great if your product did this. And then most come in through sales, right? Which is your sales teams have, especially for B2B specifically, which is what I'm more used to. B2B, where sales comes in and says, okay, I have this customer on the hook. They'll buy the product, but only if we deliver this feature, right? And companies love doing that because it's, in theory, guaranteed revenue. So a lot of times, product, especially in B2B, your role is like, your job is to say no and find ammo to say no to those requests. And then external research, looking at what your competitors are doing, where the market's headed. And then internal research can be, if you're kind of a product-led company, looking and seeing, okay, if we have a free trial conversion or something, are people that use this feature more likely to convert? Then maybe we should invest more in this feature. And people who don't use this feature are still converting, so maybe that feature is not as useful and things like that. So there's a lot of tools and data points to look at ideas. But the key thing to remember, and this is a coffee mug one of my bosses gave to me, that's a quote from Pragmatic Marketing, which is a kind of a product training program, which is, your opinion, although interesting, is irrelevant, which is basically all these things, the executive, customers, internally, whatever, your opinion doesn't really matter, right? Prove to me that it's important. Prove to me that it's valid. So as a PM, you need to develop skills around taking an idea and being able to develop a business case around it, be able to test it, be able to validate it, that it's actually going to achieve the results you want to achieve. And then ultimately, those ideas go into your roadmap, right? So this is just a stock roadmap, but what you're going to build for the next couple of quarters, the next couple of months, the next couple of years, right? So this is a very large roadmap of different categories and whatnot, but it's your roadmap, right? So once you have an idea, now what do you do? Well, this is where kind of prototyping, and we'll talk more broadly about kind of experimentation comes in. So prototyping is nothing new. It comes from more of a hardware background. Obviously, when you're building hardware, when you're building a material, there's lots of stages of prototypes where they still make these clay cars to look at car designs. But really, you're just trying to validate the software side especially, you're trying to validate your hypothesis. So you're saying, okay, if we're going to change feature X, if we're going to make this modification or add this new feature, then we expect the result to be this, right? We expect that users will like it. We expect that it'll increase conversions. We expect it'll increase revenue, some kind of metric that you're using and you're trying to validate. It can also be learning. I've done a lot of kind of prototyping experimentation where we don't really know what to build yet, so we're just trying to kind of get something out there so we can learn from users. But probably the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is reducing your investment, right? Because it's very expensive to build the wrong thing. And the easiest way to build the wrong thing is to do all these mistakes of just following someone's opinion, right? And you say, well, we think that this feature will work, or sales comes to you and says, we still have this problem at our company, which is sales comes to us and says, if we build this one feature, I promise you this customer will close. Well, then we build that one feature and the customer doesn't close, right? So now we've wasted all this development time building this feature. So there's a couple of different ways. When you talk about prototyping, there's a lot of different ways kind of this stage of the product process can happen. So we'll talk about a few of them. But so it kind of depends on what type of company you're in, how it's operating, or what type of development you're using. So probably aware of kind of the waterfall versus agile development, right? So in waterfall, it's all one step at a time. You have your requirements, and then you do design, then you do implementation, and then you test it and implement it, right? So prototyping happens here in the design phase. And this kind of assumes that you know what you're doing, right? So I've had cases where we've used waterfall to great success because, like, for example, if you are building a feature for one customer and you say, okay, we're going to build this one feature for one customer. They know exactly what they want. They want us to add, this button to the product. They want us to add this page to the product, or whatever it is. So you develop the requirements and you put together some mock-ups. You show them the mock-ups. They say, oh yeah, we like it. We want this button to be bigger. We actually call our salespeople sales reps. So let's change that, make the changes, and you build it, right? Works pretty well. But the problem is you don't have a whole lot of chance to learn anything because you're not really iterating and you're just showing them prototypes, and it's not a very efficient way to learn and test. So most companies claim to work agile, which is kind of just a word that everyone claims to be now, but in theory you're moving away from waterfall, and from a product perspective at least, you're having much more iterative development. So in theory, instead of having all the requirements done up front and building the whole thing and then implementing it, hopefully you're developing and building and testing all the time, and you're implementing smaller pieces of the feature, and iterating on it and moving a little bit faster. So that's kind of the idea. But like I said, different ones do it in different ways. So like at Sabre, when we had large airlines, the prototyping phase was spent with the customers. We would do wireframes, we would review, we'd get sign off. And like I said, some features we would write into the contract exactly what the feature was going to do. So there wasn't really this iterative testing going back and forth. It was literally, you're going to build this feature, here's some money to do it. But how do you test ideas at a company like Facebook, where you're not building something for one customer? You're not given the requirements up front. You have an idea and you have millions of customers. So what do you guys think? Oh, whoops, I jumped ahead. So you're a product manager at Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg comes to you. He says he wants to improve the mobile app. He wants you to do it. So what's your first step? What do you do? What do you guys think?
Go through the user life cycle and figure out where there are areas of improvements.
What's that?
Go through the user life cycle and figure out the different steps in the data, and by looking at the data, figure out where there are areas for improvement on the app.
Yeah. Yep, that's a good one. Look at the app, look at user data. Did I skip one? Okay, sorry, I skipped ahead. Reduce the size of the app. You mean like the local storage size?
Yeah, most likely the local storage size, and more likely on how it adapts to different, when it's on low power, when it's how it manages its push notifications to use the RAM and not affect any other apps. I think that is something I would work on Facebook.
Why?
Because I feel it consumes a lot of RAM. I've used the Facebook app on a few Android phones, and my friends have the same issues as well. That it uses a lot of RAM, which in turn slows the phone out. So, and it uses a lot of memory because it stores almost everything in cache, maybe.
So you'd optimize the speed.
Yeah, speed and performance is something I'd focus on.
Okay. So some of you are thinking like product managers, which is look at the challenges faced by users, go through user feedback and resolve the issues faced by users, customer research to some extent, but yeah, so Facebook in particular is very metric driven. So I think I have some more. So here's what I said I would do. First thing I would do is define the problem that we want to solve, right? So improving the mobile app is, I mean, I gave you a very high level prompt, but what do we want to do, and what's the goal as a company, right? So you talked about so I would define the problem. Do we want to increase monthly active users, which is the a major goal that Facebook uses. Do you want to increase user satisfaction? Maybe we want to increase ad performance? Maybe we want to make more money from our advertisers. But yeah, I would look at top performing features, experiment, et cetera, But the key is to really define that problem and add a metric. So those of you that answered with like optimize the speed, improve performance, things like that, that's certainly worthwhile. And that's definitely something that a PM could work on. But just think about how that relates back to your users, right? Do users care if the app is faster? Do users care if it uses up too much RAM? Are they going to stop using Facebook because of how much RAM is being utilized on their phone? Maybe some will. Maybe 1% of users are angry at the app because it slows down their phone. Maybe 99% don't care. So the role of the PM is really to be the voice of the user at the company and help prioritize features and ideas based on what users want, what customers want, what metrics you're after. And this is basically, I misspelled improving. So I interviewed with Facebook 2 years ago, but if you go through a Facebook product interview, this is basically the whole exercise. Is they will give you a prompt. It'll be more specific than this. I think mine might have been marketplace. It was like, what should we do to improve marketplace? Right? And so the exercise is basically going through and saying, okay, well, first I would say, how do we want to improve marketplace? And then go through it. There's a whole framework you kind of have to use for their interviews. But that's kind of the Facebook way, right? Is to really go back to the user, come up with metrics, and iterate. So that's a fun little exercise. But the point is, they are able to do A/B testing, right? So in the Sabre big prototype world where you have one customer or you have lots of customers, but it's a technical product. You can't just experiment on the design. You can't just change it. Prototyping becomes important. But at a company like Facebook, Netflix, all the B2C companies, they're doing constant A/B testing, right? So if you look at what Netflix did early in their career or early in their company with personalization, the whole Netflix personalization, engine was a huge kind of step forward in personalization and using data to power the product. And that was based on a lot of A/B testing. I'll link at the end, but the old product chief at Netflix does a lot of product talks and talks a lot about how they run their experiments on new features. But there's A/B testing, right? So I'm sure you're all familiar with A/B testing, where you show two different designs and then you measure the impact, right? So if you're Facebook and you have 50 million users a day, then you can run experiments like this. At Shipwell, we have 50 customers, so we can't do any A/B testing. So it's unfortunate. But it's interesting what Facebook does. So this was someone on Twitter asked for submissions, but this was at one point in time, all of the different Facebook mobile designs they were testing simultaneously. So he asked everyone to take a screenshot of their Facebook app and send it in. So you can see they're testing different designs, like different designs of the icons. They're testing different layouts. They're testing probably notifications. Do we do text? Do we do no text? So they're constantly experimenting. So when you talk about prototyping and experimentation, in my mind, it's kind of one and the same. Where I'm sure there's a step before this where they're doing some rougher wireframes and prototypes. But really, when you're looking at testing your hypothesis, you're looking at, okay, does this design, does this feature achieve the result we want to achieve, right? So all of these tests will have a metric associated with them, right? Like if maybe they want to acquire, they want to attract more customers to use, I don't even know what this icon is for, whatever the globe is. Right, so we'll test different designs. Where do we put this so we can get more users there to interact with that specific feature and spend more time on the app, right? So all kinds of things like that. So it's fascinating that the number of tests they're running all the time. But how do you test ideas if you can't do this giant A/B testing, right? So like in my companies where we can't just change the design of our product because it's a business product that people are trained on how to use. Well, again, the first step is to fully understand the problem you're trying to solve. With the feature or with your product, you have to really understand why people are using it, and then make small iterative changes. Definitely include users and customers in your prototypes and wireframes. Test frequently, have that clear problem focus, and constantly be asking why. Why would someone use this? What are the alternatives? Things like that. So we'll do another scenario. So you are a product manager at Slack, and the sales team comes to you and they say, prospects are telling us they want to be able to run meetings in Slack, right? Because in Slack, there's no video, like you can't run meetings, at least as far as I know, like you can with Teams. So you as a PM, you're asked to put together a business case. You're asked to figure out what running meetings in Slack looks like. So what do you do? User research to look at use cases, that's good. Yep, look at the competitors. Yep. So while y'all are typing, I'll go ahead. Let's see. Yeah, so there's a lot of things to do, but some things that came to mind for me were find out what running meetings in Slack really means, right? Define the problem, try and find a metric to define the success, right? And then of course there's a lot of other things. Look at competitors, like you said. Look at the market size. Look at users. See if any users are requesting it. Yep. Build the user cases. Yep. Market sizing. Success. So we can talk to prospects. We can talk to internal users. And we can probably build prototypes associated with that, right? So this is where I would first I'd define the problem. I would say, users. My first thought would be users don't want to switch between Slack and Zoom, right? They're using Slack. We built a great product in Slack. They're using it all day long, but they have to leave Slack to run meetings. So can we develop an experience where users don't have to run multiple applications? And then I work with design to figure out, start putting together some solutions, and then show those to prospects, the ones that were asking for the feature. I'd show them to internal customers, try and get feedback, right? That's the general idea. See if there's any more. Yeah. Yeah, look at user usage and figure out if they even need it. Very good question. Very good question. Just because somebody's asking for it doesn't mean we should do it, right? Okay, so let's say we take this to, which is what generally happens, take it to development, and I just kind of did a high level thing here, right? But so you take it to development and they say, okay, yeah, it's going to take 6 months. We need all the designs up front, and then we're going to do, okay, we'll do a pull back end for 3 months, we'll do front end for 3 months, we'll test, and then the users can look at it, right? Does that look very agile to you? But they'll say that we're agile, right? Because within here we've got a sprint, we've got a sprint, and we're doing iterative testing and such, right? But as a product, and this is how most companies still operate, even ones that call themselves agile. And the problem as a PM is that there's this, right? That they need the final designs and requirements here, right? Because they're not going to start building. They're going to tell you they can't even estimate until they know exactly what we're going to build. So yeah, you can shop your prototypes around. You can get some feedback, but that's not a great way to run iteratively. So then there's this idea of MVP, minimum viable product, right? So there's a book called, I think it's called Lean Startup or Lean something. Came out about 10 years ago or so, that talks about this. So, and I pulled this graphic from an article that I really like. But this is just kind of an analogy of this way, right? Which is like, we're going to build a foundation, we're going to build the front end, and then it's going to be done in 6 months. This is kind of the same thing, right? So we're building a car. Customer tells us they want a car. We start with a wheel. We build the foundation, and we build the chest, the body, and then we have a car, right? But none of this is usable by the customer, and it's not usable by anyone until you finish the whole thing, right? And you could maybe, when you get to step 4 and you deliver the car, that's not really what the customer wanted. So there's this other idea of building things truly iteratively, which is first you build a skateboard, then you build a scooter, then you build a bike, then you build a motorcycle, and then maybe if they still need it, you build a car, right? And the idea here is a change of thinking to go away from this, big bang waterfall approach to, okay, what's the problem we're really trying to solve? Is the problem, in this case, let's say it's I want to get from, A to B, and they tell you they want a car. Well, first let's build a skateboard, and probably a skateboard is not going to be enough, right? But at least it's a place to start. And then what often happens is, you get to the scooter or the bike, and that's actually good enough, right? They didn't actually need the car, so you saved a ton of money by not building the car because all you needed was the bike. So this is the slide, not like this, but this, right? So the customer's still not happy. Man, they're still not really happy. And they're still not really happy, but maybe by step 4, you build something that you can sell and they're happy with. And then maybe if they still want step 5, you can go and build step 5. So this is a development structure that like at Shipwell, we're trying to move to this type, right? We're still very much, big bang kind of waterfall in terms of how we're delivering big efforts. And we're trying to move towards this kind of more iterative MVP approach. It's very, very difficult to do because developers really don't like it, right? Because developers see it as a big waste because they built a bike and now you want me to go back and build a car? Like, why did I waste all this time building a bike? You should have just told me about the car in the first place, right? So it's a big shift for most companies to operate this way. But as young hotshot PMs, you should be on the cutting edge of this type of thing. So a good example of this is Spotify. right? So Spotify was founded in 2006, and they had some assumptions that people are happy to stream music rather than own it. The labels were willing to do so legally. At this time, that was a question mark after Napster and whatnot. And that, more importantly, that fast and stable streaming was technically feasible. So they defined a very clear metric for success, and they said, how many milliseconds does it take when I press play to want to hear the music? They wanted it to be instantaneous. They didn't want you to have to, when you change songs, to have to load for 10 or 15 seconds. So that's what they did. And there's some prototypes before this, but their skateboard was this player, and all they did was focus on this metric. And it turns out that was all they needed, and the company grew from there. So that's how a lot of startups start, is this kind of very, iterative approach, and then a lot of companies kind of lose that and don't know how to recreate it on larger projects. Anyway, something to keep in mind. So if we go back to our example, running video meetings in Slack, right? So if we're saying the car is building a full video system to compete with Zoom, let's say, right? So should we compete with Zoom and build, spend 6 or 12 months building out a Zoom competitor? Or is there some way we can start sooner than that? So I just kind of made these up quickly, but maybe the first step is to just integrate the calendar, so you can launch Zoom from Slack. Maybe change Zoom meeting settings inside Slack. Support audio-only meetings. Have an integrated browser window to run Zoom inside Slack, right? There's these kind of steps you can go, and you can test, right? You can do this first step, see if people use it. Maybe you, launch these features and nobody uses them, and then you go, oh, well, we got to step 2, and the adoption is so low, we're just going to scrap the whole project. And think about how much time you saved by not starting with step 5, building the whole thing, right? And that's one thing that the Netflix guy talks a lot about, is that the idea of stopping your investment and cutting the sunk cost, right? And so many companies put a plan together and don't have any checkpoints in the middle, and they say, we're going to build this car, and they just build for 12 months, and they turn around and go, oh, we built this car and actually nobody wants it. But it's too late now because we already built it, right? So as a PM, being able to iterate, finding ways to work with prototypes, to work with experimentation, and develop these checkpoints and metrics, and say, okay, we want to, what's our goal? Maybe we want 20% of users to run meetings from within Slack. And if you get to step 1 or 2 or 3 and you're at 2%, then something's wrong, right? So that's that idea. All right, so along those lines, how do I define the success of my solution? So a big part of PM is working with data, and I know some of you are, I think, in data analytics or data science, and that's not exactly what I'm talking about, but that's a part of it, which is a lot more in depth. But I'm talking about more from a product and business standpoint, which is understanding the value that your solution is creating and why people are using it, right? And that's really what the PM should be able to focus on and optimize for. So I recommend you check out North Star Framework if you haven't. There's a lot of great articles and blogs about that. Very simple framework of measuring customer value and working towards it. So for example, Facebook is monthly active users, which is basically, they gauge all their projects and ideas against that metric, right? Spotify is, it's something around listening. I know Netflix, when Netflix started, it was, when Netflix started streaming, it was percentage of our members that stream more than 15 minutes a month, or 15 or 20 minutes, because that was like one episode of a show, right? So if you stream more than 20 minutes, you're watching 2 shows, 1+ shows, and you were getting some value out of it. So they tested all their features and prototypes and ideas against that metric. So understand how to put together metrics and capture data for it. OKRs, most companies are moving toward OKRs, which is a way to track performance and set goals across the company. You should be aware of that. And then product metrics, there's a ton of product metrics we've kind of talked about. If you go back, we go back to that B2B and B2C slide, we're looking at adoption. You know, if you're looking at MAUs at Facebook versus, you know, NPS scores, or how many features, or how many people are using X feature, there's a whole bunch of ways to look at product metrics. But I suggest you all kind of research product metrics and North Stars and how to be able to speak about the value that your product is creating. All right, I'm trying to go quickly so we can get to questions. All right, so some skill sets. We've kind of talked about it, so I don't think it's a surprise. Understanding your user and market, being able to speak for your user, determining value, and creating metrics. Wireframing UI basics. You know, we didn't really talk about wireframing because I don't know. I don't think wireframing is that difficult, and you're probably gonna have a design person. But as a PM, you're not really. Your skill set is more defining the problem, right, and not so much being able to draw little boxes. Not to degrade that. That sounded very judgmental, but you know, your skill is more in being able to tell that designer what problem you're trying to solve. Certainly writing PRD and the communication skills, storytelling, putting yourself in the user's shoes and speaking for them. All right, so I wanted to go through a couple of quick case studies from my career that I think are interesting. So this first one is, so when I was at Sabre, the product that I owned was called Flight Explorer, which is actually this product here with the screen here with the map. And it's basically used by airline dispatchers. So this is what a typical airline dispatcher desk looks like. They work at airlines and they talk with ATC, they talk with the pilot, and they create the actual flight plan and look at weather and things like that. So they do a lot of different things, which is why they have way too many screens. It's a very technical product. It's used by certified dispatchers making safety decisions, essentially. So this is what it looked like. And you can see it was a pretty old product. It was about, I think it was first made in the 90s, and it had this toolbar, right? So all these icons and buttons, the old like Windows design, and then when this is not what it looked like, but this is, you know, the ribbon bar from Microsoft that was available to us, and we built the we redid this with the ribbon toolbar. It was prettier, it was arguably easier to use, and so I went out and showed users the new design and the old toolbar design. So which one do you think they preferred? I wish I had the actual, but I don't have access to it anymore. New or old? So I took this to users, and we actually implemented it. We implemented it, and users could we put it out a new version. It automatically went to the new toolbar, but they could revert back to the old one because we knew some people preferred it. And when I was talking with customers, they overwhelmingly preferred the old toolbar. Why do you think they preferred the old one?
Was it because of, you know, the familiarity of the existing employees with the user interface of the old one, and like even with the smaller change, the smallest of change could probably lead them making a critical error, which could like probably, you know, put thousands of lives at stake. If they were sort of misled into creating sort of conflicting flight paths, if they sort of confused even a small feature or a small icon in the new UI set. So I guess that could prove very costly, especially given the nature of their work. That's what I think.
Yep. Anybody else? Yeah. So you're right. There were two big factors. One was that exactly. They were used to the old design. They knew where things were, and they didn't want to change, right? The other reason was the new design looked better, but there was more clicking required, because on the old design they had all these buttons all over the place, and they could get to a lot of things quicker. And the new design, a lot of them were hidden behind these like more ribbon menus, right? And our designers would tell you that the ribbon was better, and that it worked for the users better because there was more white space. It was prettier. It was easier to navigate. Nobody likes looking at all these buttons, like there's 30 buttons on a row. But that's what the users had been trained on. That's what they had come to expect. That's what they preferred. So it was just a very good example of, you have to get out and test your designs. You can't just trust yourself. You can't trust your design team. You can't trust all the people internally. It goes back to that, your opinion, although interesting, is irrelevant, right? You have to get out and show it to people and understand. And we did end up having to kick people off this because it was holding us back technically. And a lot of people did not, people went kicking and screaming. But yeah. Okay, next. Another just kind of interesting story from Flight Explorer. So I mentioned that it's used in the by the dispatchers, and we identified a problem. Pilots and dispatchers were looking at different weather data. So the dispatchers were, you can see here, a ton of weather charts. The airline had paid a lot of money for this really high quality weather data, and the pilots didn't have access to it. The pilots, when they're on the airplane, they were getting some weather data, but like between flights, they were just pulling out their phone and looking at, freeweather.com or whatever, right? And so we thought, I wonder if there's an opportunity for pilots and dispatchers to look at the same weather. And at the same time, pilots were starting to put tablets in the cockpit. So almost all the pilots had tablets. And we had an advantage because Sabre, we had a ton of weather providers. We had a ton of flight data. And so we thought, I wonder if we can build something to get pilots that same data. So we put together a focus group of pilots, and this is one of the prototypes that we had. It's basically a very simple tool for pilots to use, primarily between flights. So like this United pilot is looking at this flight from Houston to LA. They can get an idea of the route. They could click here and go into these full screen and look more details. They could see the origin airport, the destination airport, and then they could go into each origin and destination airport. A ton of more details. They could click here and go into more details. So we created a few prototypes with this pilot group, and it started off with kind of journey mapping. So we looked at their day. What do they do on a day-to-day basis? When are they looking at weather data? I actually observed some pilots. I flew with them in the cockpit and watched them see how they were making decisions, when they were looking at weather sources, what those sources were. We created first mock-ups for the focus group, and then we had prototypes, and we had a few beta pilots that used them, gave us feedback, and turned it into a product. So that was just kind of an example of really true prototyping, where you have like a focus group, you have a beta group that you're going through prototypes and iterations with, and building something that they want to use. So it's fun. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation just about, but I wanted to leave you with a few professional tips. So if you're interested in product management, here's some tips for you. So I think that you've probably heard this, but the most important thing you can do is connect with people and network. And, you know, I always tell students you have this big advantage when you're a student because, you know, you're not, although you're probably looking for a job, you're kind of, you can pretend like you're not looking for a job, right? Like you can email someone and say, hey, Carson, I see you're a product manager. I really want to learn more about product management. I'd love to sit down and chat with you, right? And that's a very easy email or LinkedIn message to write. And most people will say, sure, it's a student. I'll be happy to help out a student. If you're like some unemployed guy that I know is looking for a job, I'm gonna be like, no, I don't want to talk to him because he's just gonna be looking for a job, right? So definitely network. Use the UTD network. I would definitely join Product Camp. I think Product Camp, they might have just had their session, I'm not sure, but Product Camp, I know I've been to in Dallas and Austin. They put on great events and have some other stuff. There's a few other product networking groups probably in Dallas. This QR code, I created a Google Doc with some resources on it, some books and articles and stuff that I recommend. There's so much information online on Twitter, great Twitter follows and blogs. You can learn a whole bunch. I mean, I still read probably 5 or 10 articles a week on product because that's where most of the good information is coming from. So definitely check that out. Start a product. I've never done this, so it's easy for me to say, but you know, if you're looking to really get in, a lot of people want to hire you know, founders and people with that entrepreneurial spirit. So start something. It doesn't have to be the next Facebook. It doesn't have to be a great idea, but just, you know, build a website for something. Show that you can kind of manage all parts of having an idea, taking it to fruition, I think is a good exercise to go through. Broaden your education. So, you know, take finance classes, take accounting classes, try and be dangerous with all the skill sets that you have. So you can speak to a lot of different things, read tech blogs and news, learn to speak and think like a PM. So I think reading, you know, like when I went to UTD, I didn't have a business background at all. And I read, just tried to read like the Wall Street Journal and just kind of pick up the terminology and the kind of the business lingo. So, you know, just read blogs and try and figure out the lingo and how to speak like a product manager or someone in tech, I think is good and will help you. You know, when you interview, you'll sound like someone that's already kind of in the industry. Definitely work on communication skills. I'd recommend doing case competitions. Try and work on your presentation skills. Product managers sometimes do a lot of presenting, going on sales visits, going to conferences, things like that. So that's a great skill to work on. Group projects where you're working with others and communicating and persuading and leadership and all that stuff is a great skill to have no matter what you do. And then, you know, don't be afraid to start your career in product somewhere else. So, I mean, I started in consulting and then got into product management. We hire product managers that have been in sales, that have been developers, that have been, you know, in project management. It's a very diverse background type of industry. It's not like, oh, you have to go get a finance degree and then spend 5 years as a finance analyst and then be a finance manager. It's definitely not that type of career. People have very, very diverse backgrounds. So if you want to get in product and you can't get a product job or something, or you can't get a product internship, if those exist, don't feel like the door is closed. You can definitely work your way in. And, you know, a lot of it can be industry experience. So like if you are, let's say you, you know, you're in consulting in the airline industry, or you're a project manager in the, you know, a specific industry like the airline industry, then you know a ton about how airlines operate, and then a company like Sabre will hire you as a product manager because you already know about the airline industry. So, you know, your skill set and your knowledge can be kind of tailored to what you want to do. So, yeah, those are my tips. I think that's the end. So I'm happy to. I think I created a Q&A slide. So you can type in your questions here, or you can just ask me if you have any questions.
I think we have some questions in the chat section.
Okay.
So I can read them for you if you'd like.
Yeah, I don't think I can view the chat, or I'm not smart enough to figure it out. So,
Yeah, so I think Amlan is asking, when you talk of PRDs, is there a specific template that you use or modify for your PRD?
we have one that we use at Shipwell right now, but I think we just found one. I mean, not really, no. I would say the sections I include are, I focus on the market background. So, like if it's a big feature, like what is this? I try and explain it to someone that has no idea what I'm talking about, right? So like if I'm gonna I'm working feature I'm working on right now, for example, is how do we add rail to the platform for shippers to book rail shipments? And so I try and start with what is rail? Why would someone want to do rail? Try and tell the user story of who's going to use this feature. So I include a lot of background information. I'll talk a bit about competitors. I'll talk about specific customers that are asking for this feature. Why are we doing it? Talk a lot about the results and the value we want to achieve with it. And then the second half would be technical, user stories, integrations, technical risks, maybe some, if I've started doing some mockups or wireframes, I'll include those, all kinds of things like that. So we don't have a specific template, but those are kind of the things I would include. Do you have any more from the chat?
Carson, I've just posted all the questions in the chat in AHA slides.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Working at Shipwell, how important is the role of PM in supply chain management? I don't know. Supply chain is a big industry. So we're a very small. Shipwell's a very small piece of the supply chain industry. But it's getting bigger. I would say technology use across supply chains is increasing. There's a big opportunity for optimization and analytics. I'm sure you're all aware of the supply chain issues right now globally that are kind of outside of probably technology can't assist too much in that. But yeah, I think that firms are looking for more ways to optimize and get ahead, and they're starting to see, like at Shipwell, part of our kind of company thesis is that Amazon really certainly changed consumer expectations for shipping, right? When our founder was basically like, well, I can go on Amazon and the app and see when my toilet paper is going to be delivered, but I'm sitting with this company, this Fortune 500 company, and they can't even tell me where their goods are around the world, right? And so that was kind of the thesis for us, is trying to just put together more visibility around supply chains. So I think more companies are adopting that. If you look at the rise of Flexport and Project 44, there's a lot of visibility providers that have popped up and gotten a lot of VC funding. So I think there's definitely a hot market right now for tech and supply chain. Any tips to get buy-in from other teams? Yeah, so I think the key thing is, and this is a good question, I've gotten this question before on lots of interviews, and it's around your ability to persuade and motivate others that don't necessarily report to you. And the way I look at this is being able to clearly articulate the user problem and the value and what we're trying to build. Right. So if let's just use the minivan vacuum cleaner example, right? If I'm like, hey, let's put a minivan in the vacuum, and these car engineers are like, what? That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Why would we do that? And the sales team is like, this is a terrible idea, right? How do I convince them that this is a good idea? Well, I need to have my research done. I need to be able to say, look, we did a survey, and 60% of minivan owners say that their cars are dirty all the time. Or they get a car wash on average once a week, and it costs them $40, and we think we could cut that down and save them money, right? You need to have your kind of your homework done on why you're doing the feature, and then you can explain that to them, which is part of what I try to include in the PRD. But try and explain them, how it's going to help the company, how it's going to help the user, and I kind of try and steer the conversation that way to get buy-in. What are the traps to avoid while creating a product prototype and while getting started with the basic product idea? So I think it's a good question. There's a few things come to mind. One is make sure, we've talked about it, but make sure you really understand your user, right? Make sure you really understand the problem that you're solving. And I've sat around with a lot of smart people and they tend to overthink things, right? And it's like, oh, what if we included this? Or maybe people want this. Or maybe, wouldn't it be cool if it did this? And a lot of the best, certainly design products are very simple, right? And so that simplicity comes from really understanding your user and what they're trying to do. Like the iPhone is a great example where there's a lot of reasons the iPhone was successful, but if you just look at the keyboard, I'm sure a lot of users were dissatisfied with the keyboard and they wanted to have a button that jumped right to the email app or whatever, right? But Apple was able to look at the market and say, okay, well, maybe yes, 5 or 10% of users need these technical features, but 95% don't, right? And you can see that today with how they design with Mac OS, which does 95% of things really well, and then 5% of things just there's no chance, right? Whereas maybe Microsoft tries to be 100% for everyone. So Apple said, we don't care about that. We're going to do what 90% of people want and do that really well. And that 10% use cases, we don't care about them, right? So when you're doing prototyping, just try and be really focused on your market, your user, the problem they're trying to solve. Keep it simple, and then test it iteratively. Try and show it to people outside of your internal group, and get feedback. Let's see. What are the biggest challenges you face while working with data teams? I don't know. I would say probably just people don't understand the question that we're trying to get to. So like we use data at Shipwell for customer insights. We have some some customer facing data science tools, and those work pretty well. But I would say just again, going back to your job as a PM, a lot of times is to share that vision and share that, why are we doing this feature? What problem are we trying to solve across the team? And when that's not understood on the data side, when they see their job more as just, moving things from the in pile to the out pile, and they don't have a great understanding of our customers or why these specific data points are important, then that slows things down and they end up pulling data that's wrong. So yeah, I guess I would say data teams need to know who our customer is, what they're doing, why the data they're pulling is valuable and what it does. Some courses I took that helped me in my current role. It's been a while, but let's see. I mean, I would say the consulting class. I took a consulting class that was helpful because we did a little consulting assignment and then I worked in consulting afterwards. But the consulting assignment was great because it got you in that, because product can be a lot like consulting sometimes, which is like you're working with customers, you're trying to figure out what their problem is, and you're building a solution for them, right? So meeting with some random company and them saying, yeah, we have this problem, and then your job as a consultant in that case, or even as a product person, is figure out, okay, they're telling me their problem is this, but is there some other problem? Is there something upstream of that I can solve for? Is there or how can I create an innovative solution to this problem? Is a great thought exercise to go through for product people. So the consulting class was great. And then anything strategy, like strategic on, why do companies fail? Why do companies do well? What industries are doing well? All things like that. is a great skill set to have. Any kind of strategic things. Yeah, I would say that's it. All right, any other questions?
Hey Carson, I just had one. So just reiterating to the case study that you sort of posted earlier regarding the sort of questions PM at Facebook has to answer. So
Yeah.
when we talk about technology or like which sort of have a social presence, like basically social media or people use to sort of increase their social media presence, what are the sort of uh, ethical questions that a PM might need to sort of consider as well when answering key issues? Because we just saw a lot of intuitive answers from the group, and even Amlan mentioned like a very good point, like how to reduce the battery and the RAM usage. But at the same time, should a PM also sort of ask questions like how do I make the app less addicting? Like how do I like literally keep people from scrolling from end to end from like hours on end? Or is this kind of thought process a little counterintuitive to uh, the very role of the PM? So what I would love your take on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't thought about it a lot because I've never worked at Facebook, so I've never had to grapple with that idea. But I mean, I would say, well, I mean, sadly, no, because I mean, yes, I think Facebook should be doing a better job of, and all the social media companies should be doing have a little more public good in what they're building. But as a PM, when you're which is probably how we got into this problem, is that as a PM, you're optimizing for, your business goals. And the business goal of Facebook is to have people spend as much time on Facebook as possible, right?
Yeah.
Because that leads to ads and that leads to revenue. And so as a PM, that's what you're optimizing for. And that's the cycle they've got into, is that they've gotten so good at keeping people on the app and attracting people on the app that unfortunately some of the things that keep people on the app are not good things, right? And so that's a good question as a PM, and obviously Facebook is grappling with this and not doing a great job, but how do you manage those trade-offs? So yeah, I don't know. I haven't to make that decision, but I suppose it's been pretty simple for me because I've always had a customer that's your customer. It's tough at Facebook because Facebook users are not their customers, right? They make money from advertisers, so it's complicated. I need to watch. There was that documentary on Netflix about.
Yeah, the social dilemma.
Yeah, I haven't seen
I guess that's sort of where my question sort of stemmed out of, because I think apart from social media, there are a lot of morally and ethically challenging questions PMs face day in and day out. Like on one hand, how do they sort of increase their user base, but the other hand, like, is that increase in user base sort of justified by the damage or the potential harm or the damage that that very product could cause to the society at large? So yeah, it's really a complex question. So yeah.
What's really fascinating is now that we're building automated cars, is now potentially product managers and other people are trying to figure out what logic to build into automated cars when they come into a bad decision. Do I run over the child or
do I save the driver or the pedestrian?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, very interesting.
Carson, I have a question.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you for the session, first of all. So my question revolves around what sort of problems do a customer face and how to identify a symptom and clearly segregate it from the problem or from a disease. Like some user base might be asking you questions regarding, I want this feature, this app isn't working the way it should be. But how do you go beyond the scope to identify the real root of the problem?
Yeah. So it's a good question. It depends on the product and what data you have available to you. So there's a couple things that come to mind. One is if you have sufficient product data, then you can look at it, right? So we'll do this like we do this now at Shipwell. Well, a user will come to us and say, I want this feature. I need you to add a feature to this page, or I want this page to work differently, or something like that. And we can quickly look and see how often is this feature utilized. Maybe this feature is used not that much. Maybe it's only used by 10% of users. So we just tell that user we're not going to do your feature request because it's not a high value feature, right? But I think more likely is sales comes to you and says, this prospect wants this feature and we want you to do it. And you have to find out if it's something you should do, something you shouldn't do, or I think what you're getting at is if there's like something else separate from that you should do, right? So in that case, it's like we have customers that will ask us, can you integrate with this other vendor, right? And it's like, well, okay, we could maybe do that, but what is this other vendor doing for you? Maybe we can do that for you, right? So it's like, instead of integrating with, MailChimp to send emails, maybe we can send your emails for you, right? Or what is the real problem? Why do you want to integrate? Is it because you don't want to switch systems? Is it because you're paying too much for MailChimp and us? Trying to figure out again, like what problem they're trying to solve with that feature request or with the action that they want, and looking at alternatives. So usually, like the first thing that I'll do when I get a feature request, because sales is really bad at taking, and really sales work, like customer service, is really bad about taking feature requests because they just take it at face value. Oh, you want to integrate with MailChimp? Okay, I'll write that down and ask the product team, right? And so the first thing I'll do is usually try and get on a call with that person and say, why do you want to integrate with MailChimp, right? Or whatever the feature is. And then they'll say, oh, well, we don't want to pay for it. Or maybe we have one guy on the team that uses MailChimp and he prefer to do it in your product. And it's like, okay, well, are you willing to pay $15,000 for us to integrate with MailChimp? And they're like, no. They're like, okay, well, we're not going to do it. So that's kind of a good skill as a PM to be able to just ask questions, figure out, is this, I think there's a little checklist we used to use that was, is the problem pervasive? There's a few others, but basically, is this something that is only affecting this one user and it's not worth doing? Is it something that, oh, actually, a lot of people would like for us to integrate with MailChimp, and we could, reduce our churn. Less people would leave. People are actually leaving us to use MailChimp. I'm just making this up, but people are leaving us to go to MailChimp. So maybe we should actually do that based on this customer suggestion, or we could charge more if we built this integration. People are willing to pay for it because now they're cutting their MailChimp subscription and they're going to pay more for us. So that's part of the PM kind of skill set, is to dive deeper and research and figure out. And it's usually just getting on the phone with those prospects, or if it's like a B2C product, you're looking at the data and seeing adoption and looking at utilization and things like that.
Yeah, thank you, Carson.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
I think we covered pretty much everything, all the questions as well. So, and we would like to announce a giveaway winner. So we are giving away this how to crack the product manager interview to Gunjan Chowdhury, because she has been a regular attendee and have been like answering every question and have also been very active on the chat. So congrats, Gunjan. And please reach out to us with your information on Teams or through LinkedIn or Instagram, and we'll get the book to you.
I have that one, and I also have, they just released a follow-up.
Oh, yeah.
That's really good as well.
Maybe we'll do that for the next. So guys, stay tuned. Yeah, and let's all take a picture if everyone could switch on their cameras real quick. Let me take a picture of everybody. Gunjan, I think you're on mute. Are you trying to say something? Cool. I think I'm good. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you everybody for joining, and thank you so much, Carson. This was a great session, and we really learned a lot. And we'll be looking at all the resources you have shared with us.
Great. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to, I didn't put my email, but you can email me or connect with me on LinkedIn or whatever. So I'm out there. Thanks. Have a good night.
All right.
Thank you,
Thank you
Carson.
so much, Carson. Thank you, everyone.